According to the United Nations Charter 1945, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants from different time zones across the globe. I, Dr. Soni Matthews, on behalf of St. Joseph's College of Commerce, in association with United Nations Global Compact Network India, UNGC, and I, Mahasa University, the Such Foundation, and Women in Tech Maldives quarterly welcome you to the International Webinar Series on Sustainable Development Goals 2030, Episode 2, titled, Can We Achieve SDGs Without Human Rights? We are delighted to host this episode on human rights on the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. As we begin, let us invoke the blessing of the Almighty. Let us bow our heads and place ourselves in the presence of God. God, thank you for keeping us and our families safe and healthy amidst these dark times. Though we are surrounded by danger, yet you are with us and protecting and guiding us. Lord, we thank you with all our hearts for giving us victory in the first episode of IWSSDG 2030. Today, as we have gathered for yet another episode focusing on human rights, we leave this webinar into your mighty hands. Lord, strengthen us to work together, not self-seeking, but for the betterment of this institution and the world at large. We pray for our collaborators, continue to bless them. We take a moment to pray for our speakers, Salil Shetty and Geeta Menon, for both have put in a lot of years of service of humanity. Lord, show your blessings upon them, grant your wisdom and knowledge abundantly on them. May they help the world at large. We thank and pray for Jesuit, especially from the Bangalore Jesuit Education Society, who consistently thrives with Marge's spirit. We pray for Father Sten, who is serving the mankind for over the years, is suffering and facing such hard challenges. Lord, grant him with good health and strengthen him. We pray for all who are standing by him during these tough times. We thank and pray for our management, for their constant support. We ask you to bless our beloved principal, Reverend Dr. Daniel Fernandez Estre, Dr. Nirmala Joseph, our vice principals, heads of the department, teaching fraternity, and ever-helping non-teaching staff. We pray for the entire team of IWSSDG 2030. We pray for the smooth proceeding of the program. Fill with your courage and spirit in all who are going live today. We pray for our continuing journey to lead us in the same spirit of faith and toil for further episodes. We ask all these in your mighty name. Amen. St. Joseph's College of Commerce has been serving as a beacon of light in the city of Bangalore, India, emphasizing teaching, learning, and research activities in the field of commerce and management. The institution is affiliated to Bengaluru Central University and offers programs for both postgraduate and undergraduate students and has around 3,000 students. It has a well-established research center. The college aims at the integral formation of its students, helping them to become men and women for others. St. Joseph's College of Commerce is one of the first autonomous college in Karnataka to be re-accredited with A grade by National Assessment and Accreditation Council, NAC, and has been consistently ranked as one of the top 10 colleges in commerce. The institution is also recognized by the University Grants Commission as the college with potential for excellence and also been consistently ranked within the top 100 colleges by National Institutional Ranking Framework, NIRF MHRD. The institution is governed by the Jesuits, a worldwide Catholic religious order, who also run other premium institutions in India and around the globe. The Jesuit mission is based on reconciliation and guided by the universal apostolic preferences of the Society of Jesus. The new UAPs by the Society are formed on 4 vital areas: show the way to God, walking with the excluded, the poor, the outcast, and the socially marginalized, journeying with the youth in the creation of a hope-filled future, and fostering ecological concern and care for the earth, which is a common home for all. This international webinar series on Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs 2030, initiated by the institution, take its inspiration and direction from the universal apostolic preferences of the Society of Jesus. Now, we would like to present a short video on human rights initiative by the institution. If your action inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. This quote best describes our beloved principal, Reverend Dr. Daniel Fernandez SJ, who has been the principal of St. Joseph's College of Commerce for the past 20 years. The Jesuit fraternity is a witness to his excellent leadership of seeking the best for the institution and its stakeholders. Father Daniel is a visionary and a prudent planner. Under his leadership, the institution has been ranked for its excellence by peers and other accrediting institutions. Father persistently works towards raising our standards of education and moving it towards perfection. In spite of the pandemic bringing enormous difficulty, he has envisioned a path to ensure that the functioning of the college excels through all the challenges. It's my absolute pleasure to invite our dear principal, Reverend Dr. Daniel Fernandez SJ, to deliver the welcome address.
Distinguished speakers for today, Mr. Salil Shetty and Ms. Geeta Menon, our valued collaborators and participants joining us from across the globe, a very warm welcome to you. It is a very pleasant evening here at Bangalore today, just the right setting to converse on a deep topic. Can we achieve Sustainable Development Goals 2030 without human rights? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a milestone document in the history of human rights. It was drafted with representatives from different backgrounds from all regions of the world and translated roughly into 500 languages. 7 decades on, but we are left no wonder if it is more a dream than a reality. Instances of brazen violation of human rights, state-sponsored perpetrators, calculated attempts to dehumanize the marginalized, anti-minority governance, suppression of the voice of dissent and difference continue to dominate the international scene. Cases and instances that go unreported are way more than what comes to light. Sometimes reporting itself becomes an act of agonizing violation of fundamental rights. Today we are here with the second episode of the international webinar series. This episode is highly relevant to the current global and regional socio-political scenario. St. Joseph's College of Commerce is committed to encouraging discussions of this appeal, as it is a legitimate approach to effectively counter the increasing culture of human rights violation. This commitment was evident when our staff and students recently participated in the protest march organized to register our disapproval in the arrest of 83-year-old Father Stan Swami, a Jesuit priest, for being uniquely different in expressing his love for the nation by unconditionally empowering the marginalized. To initiate this conversation and enkindle our thoughts on various concerns of human rights, we have two eminent speakers with us today, Mr. Salil Shetty and Ms. Geeta Menon. My gratitude to you for having consented to share your thoughts in this forum, and it is my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to you on behalf of the management, staff, and students of SJCC. At St. Joseph's, we encourage to exchange ideas by creating spaces for dialogues. Dialogues with the industry, with professional bodies, with environmentalists, and with advocates of social justice. This webinar series has been very special for the collaborations that we have established. A warm welcome to the representatives and collaborators from United Nations Global Compact Network India, Mahasa University Malaysia, Such Foundation, and Women in Tech Maldives. We thank you for your continued support. I'm sure the success of the first episode has truly raised the expectations of the participants from various parts of the world, and we have done everything possible to live up to it with the episode 2. I welcome all of you, dear participants. At this moment, I wish to acknowledge the dedication of the convener, Dr. Purnima, and the entire team towards this webinar series. The overwhelming response we have received for the first episode underlines my remarks. My special thanks and congratulations to the entire team. Ladies and gentlemen, I extend a warm and cordial virtual welcome to each one of you. This webinar series is an attempt to spread awareness about the gravity of the danger looming around. Educating the vulnerable about their rights could be the first step towards this change. May we create more spaces in our worlds for conversations, discussions, and debates on pertinent topics in order to create a society that values human rights. Thank you, and God bless all of us.
Thank you, Father, for your encouraging and inspirational words. Nelson Mandela once said, "For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chain, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others." Human rights are essential in building an equitable, peaceful, and just society. For all the 17 SDGs, with their specific targets to be achieved by 2030, the world as a global village must clearly stand for the cause of human rights, as 90% of the SDGs cannot be fulfilled without corresponding to the concerns and the issues of people who are deprived in their basic rights and who form a large part of the world's population. Keeping this in mind, let's look forward to understand in what different ways SDGs can be achieved. How should human rights groups use the SDGs, and what strategies needs to be adopted? Can we achieve SDGs without human rights? Today, during this webinar, we will get answers to some of these questions. Before we begin, let me take the honor to introduce our distinguished speakers. For this episode, we have amongst us two eminent speakers, Salil Shetty and Geeta Menon, who will take us through SDGs 2030 correspond to human rights obligations. I now take this opportunity to introduce our speaker, Salil Shetty. Salil Shetty, an alumnus of St. Joseph's College of Commerce, Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, the London School of Economics, is an Indian human rights activist. He was the first person from the Global South to be appointed as the Chief Executive of Action Aid and remained in office from 1998 to 2003. In recognition of his efforts in the field of human rights, Shetty was appointed the Director of United Nations Millennium Campaign in 2003. Under his leadership, the campaign reached over 100 countries across the globe. Shetty was appointed as the Secretary General at Amnesty India from 2010 to 2018. Considering the endless commitment to human rights and his in-depth understanding of the complexities in the field, Shetty was appointed as a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Carr Center for Human Rights in the academic year 2018 and 2019. Mr. Shetty received an honorary degree from the University Catholic of Louvain on behalf of Amnesty International in February 2012. Later, in 2014, he was awarded the Public Servant of the Year by the prestigious Asian Award in London, which is the only event that recognizes the success of contributions to the global society from Asia. In June 2018, Shetty was awarded the Stardust Achievers Award for Excellence in Humanitarian Services, which honors Indians from diverse fields in the United Kingdom. Shetty is also a recipient of CMG Award, the highest award for foreign service in the Commonwealth. I warmly welcome you, Shetty, to this episode. We are also joined by Geeta Menon. Dear participants, I'm honored to introduce Ms. Geeta Menon to you all. Geeta, an alumna of TIS Mumbai, is the co-founder of Stree Jagriti Samiti and joint secretary of Domestic Workers' Rights Union. 3 decades ago, she began her journey with fighting against injustice and exploitation of the working class community. Her efforts have always been inspired by concerns of the working class women, especially victims of the caste-based and patriarchal oppressions. Ms. Menon has been at the forefront of communal issues, domestic violence, and sexual harassment that forcibly immobilize women, further restricting their presence in the public sphere. Geeta is the recipient of the prestigious Citizen Individual of the Year Award by Namma Bangalore and has been honored with several local and national awards in the field of women empowerment, achievement, and social entrepreneurship. Geeta has been involved in various initiatives to empower the marginalized, particularly women, to find their voices. Her contribution has also been directed towards ensuring the availability of democratic space guided by constitutional spirit. In 2018, Geeta was awarded with Nirbhaya Award. Welcome, Geeta, to this episode. The platform is now open for a dialogue between the eminent speakers on can we achieve sustainable development goals without human rights. Over to you, Salil and Geeta.
So, good evening, everyone. Thank you, St. Joseph's. Thank you, collaborators of this wonderful, appropriately titled event. And we look forward, as you look forward to a wonderful time of learning, as well as discussions, as well as questions and interaction from you all. Yesterday was, Salil is there with me, so we would love to have a dialogue, and in this dialogue we all will be together. Yesterday was World Food Day, and it's with very serious concern that we note that India is on the World Hunger Index, on the Global Hunger Index, 94th out of 107 countries. And this is really of concern because the SDG 2 talks about ending hunger, eradication of food insecurity. With this in the picture, and with India having 40 million children who are malnourished, who suffer from malnourishment, and more than half of Indian women who are between the ages of 15 to 49 years who are anemic. And this scenario is so frightening. So I just would like to start with reiterating what UN General Secretary had put out in a quote, that there can be no peace without development and no development without peace. And there's no lasting peace or sustainability without respect for human rights and the rule of law. So with this, Salil, let us go on to the topic at hand, the SDGs that are mentioned here. And since you are expert at also understanding it, also being part of the process, which of the two SDGs you think are very relevant for us to really look at, understand, and explore what is the reality?
Thank you, Geeta. And I just want to maybe also open by thanking St. Joseph's College and all the different partners in this event for giving me this opportunity. I'm a full disclosure that I'm an alumnus of this college, so I have caused a lot of mischief during my years here. So I feel obliged to come back and repay my debts. So thank you all for having me here. So coming to the, just one other point, I think, which the moderator in introducing me said that I was with Amnesty India. I've never been with Amnesty India. I've only been with Amnesty Global. Amnesty India is right now an anti-national organization, so I don't want to be in trouble for that. So just by way of clarification. But coming to the topic on hand, the Sustainable Development Goals, I mean, your question was which are the most critical goals, but I just want to kind of take a couple of steps back, Geeta, because for the audience here who are with us today, some of them may not be aware that the Sustainable Development Goals are a successor goals to the Millennium Development Goals, and which are called MDGs for short, and these are called SDGs. You know how the UN likes acronyms. So the MDGs were what were running from 2000 to 2015, and now 2015 to 2030 is what we have the SDGs. And the reason I'm putting this a little bit in that context is because what happened with the MDGs, everybody was very skeptical when they came in, particularly because, for example, we take the women's movement, the feeling was it's taking us backwards in relation to the Beijing Declaration, the goals were not ambitious enough, and all of those are valid criticisms. But what happened when we took stock after the end of that period, when we got closer to 2015, actually the results were much better than we expected. And the reason I think why that happened was it was a period of relative prosperity, and I mean, China, of course, eradicated poverty to a very large extent, so the global averages look good. India also made good progress on poverty eradication at that point. So overall, the global achievements were good. But what we discovered was that the averages were misleading. And so then when you start looking below the averages, you find that at least a third of the population in almost every country is left behind. So I want to draw this distinction between averages and a disaggregated picture, because when you take the bottom third, that's when the Sustainable Development Goals focus. The slogan of the Sustainable Development Goals is leave no one behind. So, and the bottom third in particular, and the bottom third is where the trickle down theory goes wrong. And we talked about that briefly the other day, because the assumption that it just kind of goes down all the way to the bottom is not true. And so, particularly if you're not starting at the same point in the race, those who are facing historical discrimination, whether it's minorities, women, etc. And that's where the issue of the relationship between SDGs and human rights comes in, because these groups, they are facing stubborn historical poverty and discrimination. And human rights is exactly meant to address that question. How do you create non-discriminatory systems? How do you create an equal playing field? So the goal is, coming back to your first question. See, one of the things is that you can't separate the goals. They're also interrelated. And in a sense, that's the exact issue with human rights, right? If you remember, in 1948, Father Daniel made reference to the Universal Declaration. The Universal Declaration told us that the civil political rights and the economic social rights are indivisible and interdependent. So you could say that SDGs are more economic social, but you can't achieve them if you don't have civil political rights. So the two have to go together.
So the key words here are actually sustainable and development. Because when we often talk about goals, it is always in a context, and the context has kept changing over the time, from the time the SDG goals were set and from the time till now. So in this context of ever-changing society, of ever-changing processes, what has come out very sharply is that, of course, food security, education, the other goals, women, all these other goals are very, very important. But at the bottom line is the bottom line is that if there is no equality in society, if there is no baseline in society of equality, then what is the kind of sustainability possible? Because as you said that there is this hierarchy already we start out with, and in society has never been one equal kind of society, or society has never been on a horizontal level, equal. So when there is this kind of hierarchy, when there is this kind of both social hierarchy as well as economic hierarchy as well as political hierarchy, when there is this kind of hierarchy, uh, these two goals, do you think that the two goals of equality and justice, the SDG goals of equality and justice, figure most prominently today?
No, so I would say, that so the sustainable word is used in more than one way. And I think we have to remember that one of the unique things about the SDGs, as I mentioned before, in comparison to anything before, is the leave no one behind, the justice equality question. There's also the other issue which is relevant, is that the whole issue of climate and environmental justice became much more important in the last few years. So what the SDGs have tried to do is to combine a kind of human rights and environment framework. And it's very interesting that you mentioned World Food Day yesterday, but today is the International Poverty Eradication Day, and the call from the UN today is justice for all. That's the theme, both social justice and environmental justice. The three goals which are very directly relevant to our conversation today, I'd say goal 16 is the most central goal for today's discussion, and that talks about rule of law, access to justice, foundational freedoms, peace and justice together, coming together, and also the accountability and transparency of institutions. So that's goal 16. Goal 5 is crucial, it's about gender equality, and the last one is goal 10, which is directly dealing with reducing inequalities, and that's focusing on income inequality, but also political inequality, but also inter-country, because there's also the issue of north-south parity, on trade, on debt, on aid. So those are the three goals which are directly relevant for our conversation.
So in this context of when we say that equality, society, hierarchies, we are also seeing that the world over in today, the whole issue of, when we look through the lens of our society, we look at intersectionality. We look at intersectionality of caste, class, gender. And it is very vital when we look at the Indian context. I would like to talk mainly about the Indian context because that's where we have been battling all these issues. Is that especially in the Indian context? Of course, George Floyd's event showed how race permeates all over and how race becomes, race becomes a very, very issue of discrimination as well as violence. But in India specifically, and if we have to talk about development in India, besides political equality, besides political development, I think the most important thing that has to happen is social equality. And unless that social equality is interpreted as what it is today, that of caste hierarchy and repulsion. And the notion of caste that is spread over is not just that of upper caste and lower caste, but of a hierarchy that exists of notions of high and low, of purity and pollution, especially as far as women are concerned, as far as girls are concerned, and the aspect of mental and physical division of labor. These are the three notions through which caste permeates and caste operates in our society, in all hierarchies. So I think it's important for you also to, if you can talk about that, because in this while talking about the inequality generated, discrimination generated from caste, we are seeing it at all levels. And at the level of women as well as Dalits, it's very, very severe and very, very noticeable. Recently, we had the most severe, I was just reading that over the last 1 week, there have been horrific gang rape cases, and mostly on minors. It's a very strange thing that is happening, that all together, and also concentrated in the state of UP, Uttar Pradesh, which has a government which is also right wing and which is also colluding, which is also operating along with the national government. So in a setting where in UP we have the rape of the girl in Hathras. So would you like to say something? Because in that case, it's not just a gang rape. It is also about institutions. It's also about systemic violence that is there. It's also about the administration.
Yeah, no, thank you for highlighting that. Maybe we have a short kind of a slide on the Hathras incident which you could put up as well. But what I'd say, Geeta, is that in terms of please put up the Hathras slide if you can. So I would say that interestingly, since we've now zeroed in on India for the conversation, so the question is overall, how is India doing on the SDGs? And this is a fascinating question because you mentioned the World Hunger Index, and we are 94, and on almost every index, so like
136 on the gender development.
On almost all the indices, we do quite badly. The SDG index, we are 117. So and one of the examples I always give is I left the country 23 years ago, and when I left the country, we were 130 on the Human Development Index. I came back 23 years later and we are 129. So we've shifted one, by one. And
so your coming back has not helped.
Clearly not helped, or maybe my going away.
Going away is not.
I'm not sure which one. But either way, I mean, the reason I'm mentioning this is, that the first important issue that so if you want to solve a problem, the first thing is we have to accept that we have a problem, and that we are not very good at doing. We would like to keep on pretending, and we have the fourth largest, highest number of billionaires in the world. And so what does that mean? If our growth rate is, our GDP is the fifth highest in the world, and we have the most number of poor people in the world, it means that there's massive inequality. Right? That's what it means. So then it comes back to all the questions we were discussing globally. In the Indian context, the fault lines, as you mentioned, are caste, gender, religion,
class.
Yeah, and so it's interesting, right? Class and race are really almost the same as caste in India. There's such a high correlation. Normally, if you're low caste, you're also poor, and your skin color will be darker as well. So you and I would qualify as in that set. So the question is, how do you deal with these inequalities in the Indian context? And Hathras, looking at the slide, the reason we were wanting to talk about Hathras here is that in a kind of it's fashionable to talk about intersectionality of discrimination, and Hathras was, it's a horrific example of this intersectionality, because what is rape? Rape is all about how do you show your power.
Yes.
So men showing power over women, and in this case the Thakurs of Uttar Pradesh showing their power over a Dalit woman, and that to a Valmiki Dalit who is the bottom of the Dalit pile as well. And then you have the state, watching, and if anything, they're, as you said, colluding with this, and you have a judicial system which cannot respond quickly enough. So I think, so my line always has been to connect the social and the economic side to it, is that, if you have no voice, you're poor, and if you're poor, you have no voice. So the two things you can't separate out. It kind of goes back to the same point you made. So I think,
Into this, I would just intervene a little, because in India especially, I would like to bring this factor in of the cultural notions. And we are a very schizophrenic country. We are very schizophrenic because it happens to Dalits, it happens to sexual minorities, it happens to the various sectors of society. And why I say schizophrenic, especially as far as women is concerned, is that we have put women either as Devis or as Dasis. And because this inequality is there of not treating them as equals, or not even looking them at as equals, the cultural inequality, or the cultural notion of inequality comes from and is practiced in society or perpetuated by religion. By religion and by norms that are set from and internalized. Set and internalized from ages. So, the woman, like you take these norms like how the girl should behave. See, even in the gang rape case, just because in rape cases, every time the narrative is that there must have been something wrong. The woman is telling a lie. The authorities wanted to do it, but they did not do it because she didn't lie. Like Asifa's case. When we point out to only certain people get raped, and we don't rape. I mean, we meaning the more dominant narrative of the Hindus. And whenever there's a Muslim girl being raped, then that is brought out and highlighted. Like Ashifa's case, actually the rape happened she was also in a temple surrounding. So when you don't bring out those aspects we don't bring it out in our narrative because we are the biggest hypocrites. As far as culture is concerned, we talk one thing, we want to be up with the modern world, we want to be part of this globalization, but we are not ready to shed our prejudices and our blame game, especially as far as women are concerned. So when there's such a cultural kind of not vacuum, but when there's such a cultural misguidance, then there is the question of, doesn't development take a backseat?
You see, the answer is a clear yes. Clear yes.
So I think most important is that, therefore, that the problem is that there are many sections of society, and especially the very articulate sections, who don't want to focus on the issue of Dalit as part of a mainstream narrative. And therefore what happens is patriarchy becomes only a notion or a superstructure for a certain class of society, and then the fight continues on that line. But when we look at patriarchy, dominating patriarchy is also religion, and the religious discourse and the religious control that is there over family and institutions. So I just like to if you can say something about this influence of caste and culture.
No, I think obviously discrimination and social fault lines, etc., is not unique to India. But you're absolutely right that what makes the caste system and patriarchy in India very distinctive is it has religious sanction. So you have the Manusmriti, which is kind of a core text of so-called majority religion of this country, which sanctifies the system of graded inequality which you referred to, which Ambedkar rightly called an ascending order of contempt, and ascending order of reverence and a descending order of contempt, is all codified in the Hindu religious script. So we are dealing with a huge problem, and this regime, as you know, has now brought a toxic kind of combination of religion and sort of jingoistic nationalism and combined the two. So if you do not belong to a particular religion and keep talking in a nationalistic language, then you're anti-national. So we are in a very odd juncture, which I think is the second topic we want to go to.
So related to that is that the fact that, therefore, when there is this kind of all-pervasive narrative, all-pervasive control, all-pervasive hegemonic sort of rule that is taking place, these notions of development, sustainability, all remain at the background, because finally what matters is who's in control and how. It's not through the electoral process only. It's also through a system of dismantling the constitution. As you said, Manusmriti needs to come into place, because it is with Manusmriti that the control can be still more expanded and done. So when there are such gross, not only when there is such a state in motion, when there's a state that is looking at this kind of control, what place is there for any kind of human rights? So therefore, we are left to wonder whose right are we talking about. So do you have something to say on the kind of human right? Of course you have.
Yeah, not to say, but I just want to, I want to mention that, this, to close on the kind of the first part of the conversation, which is on the equality and economic justice side. We are living in a kind of very contradictory situation, because like if you ask a lot of people who we normally come across, who normally are upper caste male, fundamentally, they will say that India has no caste, reservations are bad. They have all these notions, right? And it is true, because for those people, they are talking about position of privilege. They don't have to encounter caste, because they're not the receiving end of caste discrimination. And we have, and that's not a small number, because in India, the so-called middle class, which is also the upper caste, is 150, 200, whatever the number is. We don't have an absolute clarity on the number, but 200 million is bigger than most countries in the world.
Yes.
So for people from outside, they say, how is it possible? You have so much development, software, fifth largest GDP in the world. So both these contradictions can coexist. So then now we come to the question of the foundations on which this development is supposed to happen, which is the so-called democracy, right? That's what, and Indians are so proud of saying that we are a democracy, and particularly to contrast ourselves from China and Pakistan, who are our two permanent enemies, Pakistan more than China. And so we say that we are a democracy. Now, what happens in the West, by the way, is equally complicit in this, that you equate democracy with elections. So you have an election, which itself is highly fraught with all sorts of complications, and then you say you're a democracy. And so what I always say is that, and Kofi Annan's statement that you read out earlier, there's no peace without development, no development without peace, and neither without human rights. And for human rights, you say that democracy is a foundational principle, foundational system on which human rights can flourish. Now, I always say that, if you want to say in a kind of layperson way, what distinguishes a democracy from a dictatorship? You'd say there's 3 or 4 core things which are required, right? Number one, a democracy means that power is with the people. So I say, okay, let's take that, let's unpack that. Let's look at our union cabinet in this regime. So if you do a caste, gender breakdown of the union cabinet, I mean, it's astonishing. More than a third of them will be Brahmins, who are 4% of the country's population. You'll find 2 women, if that. And then if you take the whole question of, in a dictatorship, power is concentrated and democracy is supposed to spread out. Our regime, only 2 people make all decisions. There's nothing else which matters. You take all the checks and balances. You take Parliament, for example. They have, such a massive majority. And you saw what happened this last month. I mean, they just called it for a few days. Suddenly it's COVID, there's no COVID. They passed some 30, 40 bills overnight, including some of the most draconian bills on farm sector, on indigenous rights, all of that. And no committees are functioning. There's no second reading of bills. So you bulldoze through Parliament. You take the media situation. I mean, if you're not a compliant media with the regime, you will be shut down, you will be attacked. The number of journalists who have been killed in the recent past is just shocking. I mean, not to mention Gauri from Bangalore itself, but this is happening. Anybody who's kind of doesn't toe the line is in trouble. The judiciary itself, which was always our last resort, now we don't know where we stand. I mean, you look at the number of courts, like if you leave out Allahabad and maybe Delhi, then you're counting. We have a Chief Justice in Karnataka who seems a little bit independent. But now when a case goes to court, you're just hoping it goes before the right judge, and there's so few. And so all the checks and balances, like right to information, which is a core check and balance, having public information, which is an SDG. I'm talking about all these as being the SDGs, goal 16, because these are not abstract things. I'm relating it to the discussion on SDGs and human rights. Where are we now on right to information? It's been virtually made toothless, So how do you have accountability? I mean, what's happening with NGOs, Foreign Contribution Regulation Act? Everything is decimated right now. So the foundations are itself very, very shaky. And I'm finding increasingly, Geeta, that, our middle class, the people like our friends and colleagues, they are actually finding democracy to be inconvenient. They would rather that, we get rid of all these things, all the checks and balances, because we are running out of time. We have to get this Hindu Rashtra in place. We have to become the world's largest power. We have to defeat China. Don't worry about our people. Don't worry about the Dalits, minorities, women, all of that. India is going there. Who is India then? Which India are we talking? Yes. That's the question.
That's the actual question, because actually what we are finding is also that over the last 1 year or more, we have been part of all the NRC, CAA protests. We have been part of all the curbing of dissent, curbing of the right to speak, all constitutional rights, but all that are being violated as human rights. So also we have been part of the, and what we are noticing is that along with the pandemic, the virus, the pandemic, the pandemic that has caused loss of livelihoods, no education, deaths, massive deaths in the people, the farm laws being implemented. So the pandemic is seen actually as an opportunity for democracy to be throttled. And pandemic is being seen, I mean, we are just seeing that regularly. We are getting the news, like many of our friends and supporters have been, like those who were jailed because of the Delhi incidents in February. Young, pregnant activists, cultural activists, I mean, 83-year-old Stan, Father Stan, as well as, I mean, there's a continuous pattern in this. And this pattern is basically to break down the Dalit voice, to break down anywhere, any voice that calls for dignity, that calls for freedom. I mean, this is so contradictory because you still have the constitution and you still have the pictures and you still have the parliament and you still have people taking oath. I mean, it's so hypocritical and so invalid, you know. So in this, where there's no constitution and the rule of law prevails, where is NRCA, CA, the police have become the all-important, you know, it's a police raj actually, all over. So where is the space? Where is the space for, where is the space for people and people's voices and people to come forward and raise their voice? You saw in 1 month, and you have seen also all along the justice, how it is being violated in 1 month in UP. And you can talk, you know, also, and you can talk also about it, about how the Babri Masjid issue that we have all seen, we have all grown up with that, and you know, fighting for it and against it. And also we worked in Bombay among the societies which were this thing inflicted by the riots. There was absolutely, we were able to see that it is not from above, it is not from below that the rights are there. People are living in harmony. Hindus in majority Muslim slums, Muslims in Hindu majority Islam, so living very peacefully. In fact, they were protected so much that 33 slums in Bombay did not burn during those riots. And such a thing happened after the demolition, that the genocide in Gujarat. Even after that, 28 years later, we are witness to what the judgment said. So can you just...
No, I mean, and that's why we wanted to put up the slide on, you know, because we had the recent decision of the court to acquit all the 32 accused. And, you know, we have a visual here of these people who have climbed up that thing. It was destroyed. And we know everybody in the country knows who was behind it. And, you know, as if that never happened. You know, I mean, that's why we're saying, is it an act of God? I mean, did it get destroyed? Did it get destroyed through a miracle? I mean, did some, you know, our some Ram or one of our gods just kind of waved a wand and it got destroyed? And, you know, and the reason why I wanted to kind of highlight this issue of the Babri Masjid destruction, because in some, and I was in India in 1992, you know, when that happened, and I must say that, you know, I felt at that point that, you know, it was real. After 1947, that was the second kind of moment of rupture in our society, you know, that the polarization began. And now, you know, 32 years later or whatever now, we are back to the situation where, again, the country is completely polarized. And it's polarized on almost every line. You know, I'm sure you are in the same situation, Geeta, where we cannot be in a WhatsApp group with our own family, our cousins, our friends, because the entire poison is coming through social media in a systematic kind of propaganda. You know, it's like how fascism creeps into a country, you know, how propaganda is like a Goebbelsian propaganda system. And this is a very powerful example of how, you know, we are talking about 200 million people or so who are Muslims in this country, and suddenly they're being told that you are not really Indian. Because so how do you prove you're Indian? That was what the whole agitation of CA, NRC was, that if you're suddenly going to tell 200 million people that you're not Indian because of whatever reason, you know, because you have a new definition of who's an Indian. So if you don't agree with the regime and a kind of Hindu Rashtra philosophy, you're not Indian. And for Muslims, even if you agree with that, you're not Indian because you're not Hindu. So thanks for showing the slide. We don't have to, I mean, I just wanted to kind of highlight this as a kind of example of where we are going. And this is on the back of, you know, the abrogation of Article 370. And people don't make the connection between the abrogation of Article 370 and what happened at Ladakh, and now the border conflict with China, which is like, you know, it's a very serious thing to be having an argument with the Chinese at a time when we have such serious domestic problems. So what typically this regime does is, and this is directly linked to the non-achievement of the SDGs in this country. So what are the top priority issues for this country? It's poverty, it's maternal mortality, it's all nutrition you mentioned. And instead, what are we doing? We are busy, breaking mosques down, getting one group to fight with another, Sushant Singh Rajput, so it's like a weapon of mass distraction, as they call it, one after the other. And talk about, you mentioned COVID, right? I mean, I should just make this remark in passing. Like you take the 4 countries who have been a disaster in managing COVID globally. So obviously the United States has the maximum number of deaths, etc. Number 2 is India. Number 3 is Brazil. Number 4 is Russia. What do you find common between these 4 countries? You have authoritarian leaders and a centralized system. So any epidemiologist would tell you that in a complex pandemic like this, what you need is a very decentralized approach. You need to empower local people. You need to trust in the communities to make the right decisions. But this is not like everything is decided by 2 people in the Prime Minister's office, whatever. Then you face the same consequence. So, Russia is, I mean, can you imagine that we are now being compared even with these kind of, dictatorships, the way in which we are operating today. If you look at we talked about the development indices. You look at the democracy indices, whether it is the EU Economist Intelligence Unit ranking, VDEM, Freedom House. I mean, we have slipped so badly in the last 10 years. It's shocking.
Yeah, but the saddest part, Salil, is that it's so open now because we have the digital world, we have the social media, and it's so much of it is packed with what is really happening. Some of it is also false forwards. Some of it is also false, to hide the picture. But actually, because of the revolution that has happened in the digital world, we are still able to see not only in India what is happening, gross violations, but also in the world over. In spite of that, the middle class, in spite of that, the entire educated middle class, I think many of them who are part of the audience, and in spite of that, this educated middle class is still not, even though it is so open, is still not able to get past this social media control. And I would like to say here also is that UN too has not been able to, raise it with the country. I mean, I think it's important that when it is it's violating so many principles, as well as it's so open, as well as there's nothing hidden. It depends on which perspective you're seeing it with, depends on which lenses you're seeing it with. Yet, why is the UN a peacekeeping body, no doubt, but in very, very serious matters of conflict where there have been deaths, say caste riots, communal riots, or even the tendency towards communal riots, I don't know, I'm not aware of any intervention.
Maybe you're not, you may have missed it, Geeta, just after the Hathras incident, the UN resident coordinator, in my view, made some very innocuous statements about it. The Ministry of External Affairs issued a statement saying, how can you get involved in domestic affairs? You're interfering in matters, etc. So, it's a very paranoid and very sort of skittish regime right now. So, and talking about the regime and the way in which, I mentioned earlier that the first thing is we need to be honest about the reality of the ground. So you take the Sustainable Development Goals Index, I told you where India's ranking is. Now Niti Aayog, which is our body which publishes its own index, you look at the Goal 16 measurement indicators that they're mapping, which is kind of what we're discussing now. Not one of these, issues about independence of judiciary, media, RTI, none of those are reported against. So you will never be able to know in the official data how bad the situation is getting. So we have to then rely on international indices. And then we told you anti-national because we don't have honest national reporting, that you have to rely on BBC or somebody else. Not that we want to rely on them, but there's no choice.
So very true, because media is the if you put it like this, media is the only sustainable thing in a country, but sustainable for the wrong kind of news and for the wrong kind of support. I mean, because they are supporting only certain, news. And so where is the sustainability for democracy? how can we still remain alive, remain, breathe in air, democratic air, and people can get their basic rights today. With this kind of air and atmosphere, and with the kind of political build-up of having a hegemonic state. Everything is one nation, one religion, one language, one man. So everything is connected to that. So where do we search? What kind of alternatives? What will the students inherit? And I think we should talk about that.
No, I mean, I think, to the extent that we are going to be opening it up to shortly. I think you and I have spoken for a long while now, but I would very much like to hope that not hope. I think I'm generally hopeful about younger people and what they could do, because I think older people have become very cynical and skeptical, and we've seen
very well in their comfort.
Also, their comfort zone. So young people, I think, will. And I mean, even if you look at what's happened in the country in the last 1 or 2 years, wherever we've seen voices of protest, it's come from campuses and from young people. And if you look at any, and I'm not just talking about the Jamia, JNU thing, which are again dismissed, as it's some lefty, anti-national thing, but across the country, when you look at wherever issues have come up, young people have stood up, they've raised their voice, and so my hope is with them. And I think the way forward really is, Ambedkar had kind of listed a 3-point formula of how to move forward. This is educate, organize, and agitate. So, first and foremost, I think young people should understand the issues and really not follow WhatsApp forwards. They have to go beyond that and understand. I think the critical questioning is the most important thing. And I know that there were questions which had come before also about education. Like, is education, inclusive education, the answer? I think the formal education, of course, we can't say anything bad about education. We're sitting in an educational institution now. But it's more than the formal education, right? Even for me, like in Joseph's, both school and college, what I got was not so much the formal education, but the values. Whether it's, I'm not a religious person, but the Jesuit values of equality and justice, those are deep and meaningful as far as I'm concerned. So if we have critical thinking and values of equity and justice, that's where there's hope. And I think young people are where we will get this from.
Yeah, I think just to add to that is, as long as we keep looking at development, we are still looking at the change at the situation within a structure. I think most of us, young people as well as everyone, has to start looking out for change. How do we change systems? Where do we intervene to change systems? Like I can give many examples where women started changing the rationing system, the PDS, the public distribution system. And once they started changing it, and once they went forward to form vigilance committees and took up the issue, the government realized that they need to play a part. You see, and once they started playing a part in the system, in this system inside, they found that their voice matters. And that is where I come from. That is saying that how can we bring inclusion? How can we bring the whole issue of participation of people? None of these policies that are made with the consent of the people. No one asks them what they want. No one says that, this is what we have to, how the bills were passed, how everything is passed over our heads. So the whole issue of can true democratic principles come forward, like having a scientific temperament, having the participation asked for, getting more women on board, inclusion as one of the basic principles of rule. Unless we can move forward towards that, I don't think there will be any concrete change. We will just be going along with them.
So yesterday, just to kind of make it more concrete, I spent the day in Nelamangala. So we've just had a small initiative called Yuva Shakti, which is to see, whether we can work with young people on the question of constitutional values. Because ultimately, we do have a constitution which is rock solid. And maybe some of the people in this regime don't like the constitution; they would like to get rid of it. But it is difficult to get rid of that, and that is our kind of foundation. So we're just trying to work with young people to see, how do they react to the constitution? What do they think of it? Not in an abstract, we all do civics lessons.
Yeah.
It's not about civics lessons, but if you say
my life, how does it?
I mean, you say liberty, equality, fraternity, justice, the four preamble values. What does equality mean for you in Nelmangla as a girl? And I came back super enthused. I was seeing like, I mean, if you just open up the opportunities for them, and you have way more experience of working on the ground than I do. So, I mean, yes, I just like to kind of make sure that we leave the conversation, we open the conversation with the audience in an optimistic positive.
Yes. It is only possible when it is possible. You see?
Thank you, both of you. Listening to your well-researched views, informed by your exposure to real-life scenario, has always been a moving experience. Your remarkable journey through the renowned organization and your contribution towards the society continue to inspire us. I believe the session highlighting the significance of human rights in achieving SDGs has truly enriched the participants. The forum is now open for questions. There are a number of interesting questions posed by the participants. As we have limited time, I will be asking some of the questions on behalf of the participants to our esteemed speakers. So the first question is to Salil. Are we selective in our human rights protection? I repeat, are we selective in our human rights protection?
So thank you for that question, and I think it's a very interesting question because it can be interpreted in so many ways. So are we selective in our human rights protection? I mean, at a level of the concept. So I always say, people often ask me, what do you mean by human rights? And so I always say that human rights is very interesting because it's one of those things you say is absolutely essential when it comes to yourself. But when it comes to others, then you're a bit selective.
Yeah.
So we think we should have human rights, but but if they're Muslims, then it's slightly different. I mean, that's of course, when it comes to lower caste Muslims. But I mean, you take something like, this rape case which we had recently in Hyderabad. No, the Hyderabad case. Yeah. So after the woman was raped, then there was a so-called encounter killing, where I think 4 of them were killed overnight. And then we have, of course, UP, as you mentioned, is like the world's encounter capital. So we had this Deshpande, whatever his name was, who was killed off shortly before that. And so, obviously, if you say that, if on the one hand you say you're a democracy, then, democracy comes with some rules, and that's what rule of law is, that you have to follow certain rules of the game. Even if the person is accused, that person still has the right to defend himself or herself. There has to be a due process. It's not mob justice.
Yes.
So even if that person has killed somebody or has raped somebody, they still have the right to defend themselves. But that is something, even our Chief Minister of Delhi will say that, there should be death penalty as soon as the person is, a Hathras case. No.
But we saw in the Hathras case, very vividly, how the accused, the very next day, the kind of support they got, and they came out and they filed FIRs against the victim. I mean, so I would like to ask the person who asked the question, what is his selection? How does he select human rights protection?
Yeah. No, so I mean, I just say, the answer to the question is that the whole point of human rights is that you can't be selective. You're equal, everybody is equal before the law. That's the whole point. Now, if you start using it selectively, there is a problem. And it is true, and one of the reasons I'm asked this question often is that don't Western governments selectively look at human rights? And they do. It is a fact. I mean, there's hypocrisy not just in our country, there's hypocrisy everywhere. So the double standards, when you accuse somebody else of double standards, you can't practice it yourself.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we could get Geeta ma'am's opinion as well. That's really nice. Let me move on to the next question. Will inclusive education bring forth the expected changes in the realm of human rights? Will inclusive education bring forth the expected changes in the realm of human rights?
Yeah, inclusion always is welcome. Recently, I mean, not recently, for quite some time now in education, there is what is called the human rights education. And that has been introduced not just as but as a syllabus, as a curriculum. So when there's a whole human rights curriculum, it is a good thing. And we expect that students, by and large, from a very young age, will be at least aware and able to participate and understand what human rights is all about. It does work, but in the kind of education system we have, which is already retrogressive, backward, which concentrates more on stereotypes, which concentrates more on, rote learning, which concentrates more on no thinking, no authority, no questioning any authority. Within that system, then inclusion has a very little place. So real inclusion means that children who are disabled, Dalit children, minorities children, transgenders, everyone is looked at as part and parcel with equality and with dignity. And that is what is inclusive. So fitting an inclusion into an already backward system, into an already dying system is not going to work. It has to need a lot of new thinking, rethinking.
Also, I think, Geeta, I mean, obviously, it's a very relevant question right now with the new education policy, which is under discussion. And so, on the one hand, you may know a lot more about it. It's not the subject that I've studied in detail, but there is a question of how the new education policy looks at this inclusion issue and human rights issues as well. And it's all nice and fancy to say, we want to follow an American style where everything is flexible and all students should have the option. And that's all fine and well for elite children. What happens to rural, excluded children, even right now with all this online stuff, I mean, the extent to which it's affecting poorer children, you know a lot more.
Yeah, no, you're right. Just let me say, if I have time, is that you just take a look at the RT. The right to education was a well thought of right, and it was a much deserved, and it's much needed. But the right to education has been just symbolically adapted to the schools. And I know because many of our children, we tried to enlist them and into the system, with the right to education. But what we have found is that you may give that inclusion panel, getting that seat is another big struggle. There's a lot of corruption and there's a lot of other things. But even if you get that seat, the mindset of the other children and of the schools is now changed. So that child still remains an outsider. So therefore, even if you have very good policies of inclusion and you have the RT, you have the new education policy, you can have many new things on paper. But until and unless those who are running that education system, or those who, like, say, take from parents to teachers to everyone, you have all heard about the sexual abuse in schools. You've all heard about the fact that certain midday meals, if it is served by Dalit, other children don't eat. So when all these factors exist, where does that inclusion really come in? That is up to each one of us to understand.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Another interesting question asked by one of the participants is, how can we work towards making the world a space for accommodating the heterogeneous nature of our population? So it's like, how do we accommodate the heterogeneous nature of the population? I think we would want to listen from both of you.
So I think this is a very important question because this in the last decade or so we have really a new phenomenon of populist leadership that's coming to being in so many different countries, and so probably started from Hungary and then Turkey, then we had Philippines, we have President Duterte in the Philippines, then of course you have Trump in the United States, you have Bolsonaro in Brazil, and then we have our own brand in India. And this question is kind of linked to that point about respecting heterogeneity, whereas as against othering othering people. So this whole othering strategy is to say that we are insiders and you are outsiders. So in the case of Europe and the United States, the othering is done primarily on the issue of migrants and refugees. So you say that we are Americans, so we are going to become great again, and you're all outsiders. As it happens, many of them are Muslims, but they could also be Mexican migrants from Latin America, South America, from Central America. So the way to consolidate your white male vote is to other somebody else. So when you have leaders who are coming to power on the basis of othering, then you can't respect heterogeneity. And this is a deep problem for India, because India in that sense is not really a nation. It's a mix of nationalities. So we have such our strength always has been our diversity, not just religion, but caste, language, food, culture. But as soon as what Geeta said, you want one of everything, one religion, one. But we are a syncretic country. We are not one. We are a million. We are 1,000 flowers blooming at the same time. And that was our strength, which is why, we've had the richness of music, culture, food, language. It's a cacophony of democracy. But now we want everything to get homogenized. We want one thing, and the upper caste, upper class elite in our country like that discipline, that order. So everything should be efficient. A train should run on time, and that's exactly what Hitler did. So Hitler was very good at getting the trains to run on time, but they also, put the Jews into the gas chambers. So the whole issue of heterogeneity, I think, is very linked to the question of our conception of what our society is. How do you respect, diversity and otherness? And it's as true about, the gender. I mean, your gender identity question. We can't, like, if it is, suppose it's LGBT, it's very, very awkward.
Yeah.
We struggle with that question of sexual orientation. We struggle with the question of transgender, and I struggle with it. I mean, it's very human. In our natural Indian thing, we are not exposed to these things. It takes some time. But the key thing is, if you start realizing that you can't discriminate against somebody just because they have a different opinion, a different religion, a different choice of how they live their life, whether they eat beef or not. I mean, let people eat what they want, right? What's your problem? As the government or as a society, we start saying, we like you only if you eat this, you drink this, the girl is wearing short clothes, we have the moral policing idea. So yesterday we had a very hot discussion on this in Nelamangala when we were on the ground with young people. And there was a deep division between the boys and the girls in the room, because the boys were saying, there is a problem, when you dress like that,
Yes.
you're provoking the boys. And this is not like, they are not bigoted people. This is the way in which we are brought up. They're saying, no, but we can understand, but don't forget that on the street we can't control how the boys behave. So don't go out late, don't dress like that. It's your fault. As soon as you do that, then the fault is yours. So I mean, I'm expanding the question of heterogeneity to respecting what we call. I mean, I don't like the word tolerance, because we don't need tolerance. We need respect for all views and all shades of opinion of people.
I think the question has been answered, and a very relevant question. While Salil answered it at a very all-encompassing level, I just like to say, since you as an individual, you as a student, or you as a young person has asked this very relevant question, I think the whole thing starts with you. And the whole thing starts with you in terms of, since you asked this question, my question to you is, do you want heterogeneity? And if you want heterogeneity, what do you understand by it? How are you practicing it? How is it being practiced in your family, in your society, in your community? Can we change that? Can we move from small changes? The nation, the government, the politics will go on being what they are. But unless we can question ourselves and how much is our contribution to this, non-heterogeneity, How much is our contribution to? So as young people, I think the important thing is to understand that today whatever is happening outside will happen to us too one day. You see, the dangers are lurking around. They are not far away. It is like very often when we fight on cases of violence and other things, very often people think that it may not happen to us. You know, if a rape is happening in the neighborhood, then we say, chalo, it will not come to us. You know, we'll wait. So the whole issue is that we get we try to involve ourselves in what is happening around us consciously, and with that, of course, with certain values in mind that we want heterogeneity, we want inclusion, we want we want democracy, we want the right to speak out, all these. We want no moral policing. All these comes in, but the question is, it starts from where? You see, so it starts from us, and there's a nice quote. If there's time, I just say that because this was also, as you mentioned, during the Holocaust time.
Yeah, the German priest.
The German priest. And if there is time, I will read it out. It is very important for all of us because we are living in a world of denial. Many of us, we feel it's not happening here. It's happening far away. It's happening there. It happened in UP. It won't happen in our neighborhood. So this is saying that first they came for the communists and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. The same applies for Muslims. Then they came for me and there was no one left to speak out for me. So this is the important thing that message I would like to read.
It's a great quote.
It's really powerful.
Thank you. Now the next question is to Salil. At the policy level, what needs to be done to improve the inclusivity for empowering the marginalized and minority groups?
So I think that's kind of a little bit of an abstract question, because if you take policy in a sense, because normally if you think about this, you have policies, you have laws, you have programs, and then you have the execution. So just kind of changing a policy in itself is not going to be enough. You need to, first and foremost, you need to change the values and frameworks with which you're looking at the reality of your entire population. So if you change, as we were saying earlier, you change one policy on inclusive education or one policy on gender, that's not going to change. So it leads, particularly for these groups that the question is about, the marginalized sections, there are structural barriers that they're facing. So you cannot take a piecemeal approach. It requires kind of a, what do you call it, root and branch change is needed. There is no simple way of changing it. So it's like a social revolution, right? That's needed. There's no, you can't have a policy fix to a problem. I'm not saying policies don't matter, and policies are policies. That's the other tragedy of this situation, that anybody can come up with a decent set of policies that should be in place, whether social, economic, political. How do you increase representation? How do you increase voice? How do you bring in economic equality through the taxation system? You have fiscal, you have monetary, not just me, but I think 10 people in this room can get together and say this is the ideal set of policies. And then come the politics, right? So the policy is one thing. So you have the politics, which is, who's going to oppose it, who's going to block it, how do you make this thing go through? And that's when democracy is at play. There's a negotiation process in a society. And that's why we say that the process of the democratic institution is so important, that we haven't created a media, a legislature, a judiciary and executive for nothing. This has been fine-tuned over a long period of time. It's still full of flaws, and we always say the only solution to bad democracy is more democracy, not less democracy. So I would say policy fix is easy. I think it's not that difficult. So to take policies of equity, for example, your starting point is to see what are the kind of primary production tools you have. So is it land, it's employment, all those basic means of livelihood. If you create access to the most marginalized groups and ensure that there is equity in its distribution, you can go a long way. But that's easier said than done because there are blockages at every stage. So, you see the government schemes, right? Every government comes to power and every day they will announce a new set of schemes. Then you go to the village and none of these schemes are reaching these people. So where's it all gone? It's gone to lie in somebody's pockets, or it's or it never left the Vidhan Saudha. So I think it's not policy. Most of the challenges in all developing countries, particularly in India, is of implementation, not of policies.
Just to add to this, if you see recently, without a policy, how Kerala worked, how the Kerala model of healthcare and COVID management worked, because there was no such policy as such. Of course, there's the National Disaster Management Act, but no one is following that act. It's the political will that decided, it is the interests of the rulers on the people that decided that they will do it this way. They'll take care like this, or whatever, the whole sending of migrants, that was an extremely different model from what was happening here and where we were working with the migrants. It was a totally different model. The internal respect that was there. Like first of all, the return guest worker.
I think Kerala is unique in so many respects. So it's almost, we always treat it as a bit of an exception because the history of, we have the religious history of the place, the land reform movement, the left, successive left governments, and even some enlightened Maharajas, Travancore, etc. So you have almost like hundreds of years of equity and that, and that respect, self-respect, Narayana Guru, the movement of the Ilavas, all of this has come together. But that's no excuse for the others to behave the way they did. So you can't possibly achieve what Kerala did, but you don't have to end up in the way Bihar ended up.
Yeah.
Very well said. Policy and especially implementation plays a very important role to reach to the right audience. And let me move on to the next question. This is to Ms. Geeta, and it's exclusively being posted to get an answer from your end. Is technology aiding the scope of violence and abetting the perpetrators? Is technology aiding the scope of violence and abetting the perpetrators?
I wouldn't say aiding or not aiding. I wouldn't look at it like that. But technology does play a part in perpetuating violence. Okay, and it is technology finally is a tool. It doesn't have any morals or any sense of morals or justice or anything. It's the people who use the technology. It is the maneuvering of the technology that is important to understand. And now with this technology, like we are noticing in all our cases of domestic violence and others, and even during the pandemic, when the cases were happening, and even in trafficking issues, that technology has become the new medium, especially with pornography growing as an industry, commercially viable industry, and especially in trafficking also. When the pandemic was there, there was no movement, obviously. There was restriction on movement, but there was no restriction on trafficking because the connections were still being done, the network was still being maintained through technology. That is one. If you see the cyber crimes that have increased, they have increased much more and it is much more open now. It is much more available. Available to report and available to take action on. So in a way, I feel that it has its advantages as well as its disadvantages. The technology that is there today, I feel greatly helps those who are in it with the right kind of principles or right kind of attitude. Because we can, through this technology, and like what I'm seeing all over the world, also what young people are doing, That is, with the technology, with social media, with Instagram, with any kind of new media, the movements are getting together. If there is a rape in one part of the world, there is a protest in another part of the world. So, so the action against any violation, the action against any violence is much more coordinated, is much more able to come together. And we may not know each other, but technology has made that possible, that interaction possible, communication possible. So it is not the technology that is to blame. The technology and how it is being utilized, it's finally a tool. Tomorrow you may get another tool. Before technology came, we had the tool of the TV, the radio, the other kind of instruments. So it is not the technology really, but it is the understanding or the mentality or the cultural scope of how we use this technology.
I know the question was directed to Geeta, but it's an area which I've done a lot of work on. So I would like to, I think that obviously, technology is neutral in the sense that, you have a phone, it's a phone, right? Anybody can use it the way they want. But it's a little bit more complicated than that, because when you start getting into it in a bit more detail, the question is who has ownership and control over the technology. So now, when you start looking at that, then if you take like the Indian situation, for example, we have now discovered that Facebook was actively supporting the way in which this regime was behaving and spreading false propaganda. And so, when the parliamentary committee wanted to investigate this, there's a lot of blockages. So we now, it's still under investigation, but there's some serious question marks on what's happening. You take a look at the mobile phone question itself. Now, with the introduction of Jio, they're pretty much decimating all the other actors. And we know who owns Jio. If it is anything to do with Ambani or Adani, that they get special favors over everybody else. So, yes, and Facebook in itself, you could say maybe internationally has no clear position, which I have my doubts about, because their Facebook is used as a propaganda machine, not just in India, but in many other countries. Like the attack on the Rohingyas in Myanmar happened fundamentally through Facebook. I'm not saying Facebook propagated it, but it's a very, very dangerous platform which needs to be quite carefully regulated, which has all its challenges, of course. But look at it the other way also. Look at what happened at TikTok. Now, when this regime realized that it could not control TikTok, because that was running from a Chinese source, and there were, a lot of Muslim youth were the most influential voices with the greatest number of followers in TikTok were Muslim boys. So TikTok had to go because it was seen as Chinese and we can't control it. So that's on the one hand, use of propaganda. The other side of the whole technology thing is the way in which the government is using it for surveillance.
Surveillance, yeah.
And that's become a big issue, the question of privacy. Of course, it's only when Deepika Padukone's WhatsApp chats from 3 years back start going into the public domain that ordinary people are saying, oh my God, how did they get access to WhatsApp chats from 3 years ago? But the whole issue of privacy and surveillance is another whole question which is not neutral. It starts to become very, very political and very, very selective in terms of the politics of this. That's what happens.
Moving forward from technology to education, we have two questions posted in the similar line focusing on education and youth and children. So I'll just read the question. The first question, how can education be used as a tool for inculcating values and insisting a spirit of freedom and active citizenship in children? And this similar line of a question is being posed by Dr. S. Prasanna Kumar. So the question goes like this: with natural, political, social calamities on the rise, what strategies should be adopted by educational institutions to strike a balance and to imbibe wisdom in the younger generation?
I think we've touched on we've touched on this a little bit earlier. But I think we are in a very strange situation where education, obviously, I mentioned earlier that Ambedkar's kind of formula to move us forward was educate, organize, and agitate. He had a very simple three-step solution on how we can move forward. So education obviously is the core of it, but the question is what kind of education, right? So if it's an education which is encouraging critical thinking, which is based on scientific temper and facts, that's a different education from the one which is essentially a propagandist education, which is saying that Indians had created the internet 5,000 years ago. We were flying around, all the stories about drink cow urine. That's also education, right? So the question is which education are we talking about? So if it's an education which is actually furthering the truth, absolutely we need it. So I would say education combined with values and critical thinking is what I think we already touched on earlier. So I don't want to repeat what we've said before, but I mean, we now have a situation where the heads of every public educational institution is hand-picked. History is being rewritten, the education textbooks are being rewritten, so much so that the Rajasthan government, when the Congress government came in Rajasthan, they had to revise all the textbooks which the previous BJP government had, they had kind of distorted. So it's a revisionist history, so history is now being interpreted from a Hindu fundamentalist lens. So it's not, education is not like, just as if it's some pure good. So it's
so that's what, just to add to Salil, that we have a tendency in our education system, all of us have been through that, we have a tendency to look at things in isolation. Education doesn't stand alone. The kind of political system that is there, or the kind of political structures that are there, determine what kind of educational system should be there, what kind of health system should be there, what kind of cultural system should be there. So it is not in isolation. We cannot change the education system by touching only that. We cannot change the political system by not touching education. You see, so it's so well integrated. So my question back to you, if anyone can just throw light on that, is that why is it? Because we have been working for so long, and I've been working with schools also, and I've seen schools where, and I'm still not able to understand this, I've seen schools where it's the same compound, okay, but you have a tarred road, and you have the compound tarred, and you have the uniforms very different and clean and neat and all, and that's a separate school which is for the elite. And then you have the same school compound, but that road to that compound is not tarred, and that school has broken down buildings, and the classes are broken down, and the children come in soiled uniforms, and even I'm sorry to say, even the teachers are very differently dressed. My question is that, why do we need to have a two-school system? We can just have one educational system for the country, because finally everyone is getting the same education. Whether you're rich or poor, it's that same syllabus, and it's that same textbook, and it's that same curriculum. And finally, that same certificate, which is a paper certificate. You see, so why is it that still all you people, whoever are educators, I don't understand till today why we cannot think about one public system of education. Because my understanding is that trusts, charitable trusts, educational trusts run educational systems, and they are loaded with whichever religion or community you belong to. Today you have, in the name of one caste, in the name of one religion, you have different educational trusts. They give education only to their children, only to those children of that community. So these trusts that have been set up, and the Constitution gives that right to set up educational trusts. Now they are a separate entity, there's no control over them, and they continue to play the game of whatever poison you want to inject into the children is injected. The RSS alone runs lakhs of thousands of educational institutions all over the country. The Jamaat-e-Islami also runs so many educational institutions around the country. So when that education is linked to a trust, and a trust which has a certain ideology, and a trust that is religious linked also, definitely the education cannot be what we want it to be. So why is it that we still don't have one system? We are all one. We all want one system.
Thank you. Moving forward, Ms. Geeta, this question is to you. Is it befitting to say that developing empathetic sensibilities would be the right way to motivate individuals to engage with social disclosure?
I didn't understand the question except there are big words in it.
I would repeat the question. I'll repeat. Is it befitting to say that developing empathetic sensibilities would be the right way to motivate individuals to engage with social disclosures?
I don't understand this question. I'm saying again, there are too many big words in it. I'm not sure what the meaning is. But if it is to say that empathy, if it is to say that a sense of community, if it is to say that a sense of, inclusion, if it is to say values will help, what is the social disclosure also? I don't understand. If it is to say that values, imbibing values in children will help towards social change, definitely. That's all.
With your permission, we have a few more questions. Can I just take one or two questions? Okay. So one of the question asked is human rights protection an illusion considering the ground reality? Is human rights protection an illusion considering the ground reality?
See, I mean, no government likes to be held accountable. That's true for governments all over the world. So in that sense, the extent to which human rights is about, the negotiating the rights of citizens in relation to the state, there's always going to be an inbuilt tension in that relationship. But I must say that, having worked globally with so many governments, our government doesn't matter which party is in power. Our government, the Indian government, is always hypersensitive about human rights. And because we believe that, we are the land of Buddha, Gandhi, everybody else, so we have got everything sorted. We don't need to worry about human rights. Because there's other argument that human rights is Western. And I always say that, okay, I mean, if a woman's getting beaten up by a man in a slum, and you are going to try and make sure that she's not getting beaten up, she's not going to ask you whether it's a Western thing or an Indian thing. So rights are rights. Like all human beings should have the same rights, doesn't matter where they're from. But yeah, it is true that, in our country, it's a much, much bigger challenge than in many other places. I'm not saying it's only in India, but so this question of is it a illusion? I mean, perfection is an illusion, right? I mean, I'm always asked as to which is the best country when it comes to human rights. That doesn't exist. In fact, with Amnesty International, we've always debated whether we should create a human rights ranking index. And we've always shied away from that because no one's perfect. You're never going to get a perfect score. Of course, the Nordics are always relatively better, but you look at the way in which they're treating immigrants and refugees recently, it's quite shocking. Even Denmark and Sweden have, have their chinks. But relatively speaking, you could say that, the countries who have longer history of women being educated, empowered, stronger democratic institutions, who have rule of law, those are places where you generally find less, kind of lesser extent of human rights violations. But, the United States, for example, you mentioned the Black Lives Matters movement, the killing of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, the extent of discrimination against black people, the fact that the US is the only rich country in the world, only Western so-called democracy in the world which supports death penalty. So there's so many things which are wrong, even there. And that, of course, is the first thing that our guys like to do in India is what about you? Why are you telling us this? Yeah. Look at those guys. As if they are supporting death penalty, that helps us in any way. So we have to sort our own problems out. They have to sort their problems out. So is it an illusion or a delusion? I don't think so. I think it's an aspiration and it's a norm and it's a value and we have to constantly push for it. So that's the only way it can become a reality.
Yeah, I just like to add to this because if you say it is in reality, we have faced it very, very many times. We get desperate, we get frustrated, we feel it's an illusion. But if we stick to that, then we will fail to see the kind of struggles that have taken place and for human rights and that have been very successful and that have been successful in order to give us a new life. So if we are unable to see that, then we will feel that this illusion will continue. Like take one is the freedom struggle itself. After that is the struggle of the Adivasis against Vedanta, against big companies, the struggle of farmers. Everywhere we are seeing, although there is a huge struggle to take place, yet it has yielded results. So it is not an illusion in that sense that we can get protection today. We can get human rights protection today. It's important to understand that it is possible to get it. Otherwise people tend to, especially from our middle class, we like to hide behind the fact that it's an illusion, it's not possible, it's a dream, it's utopia. So we give all these kind of connotations to it because we don't want to fight for it. We don't want to get into that thing of fighting for human rights.
I think partly, Geeta, because our rights are already protected.
Yes.
So suppose
yes.
you tell even a middle class person that your property doesn't belong to you anymore. You say no, but we have a rule of law. There's a property. We go to court or whatever. Your right to life is protected. But when it comes to the right to life of the person who's getting killed in a beef lynching, but he's eating beef, so what do you expect?
Yeah.
So it's all very, very slippery slope when it goes.
So and like Salil said before, in India, this human right question is, you looked at funnily. What is this human right you're talking about? Because in India, it is caste rights that are more important. If I as a caste panchayat or I as a caste group, I know that I have certain rights within that caste group, depending on which caste group I belong to. So therefore, because it is already sanctioned, that as a caste you have certain rights. So what is this human rights you're talking about? So in that picture in India, it is still subverted with all these kinds of.
The constitution, is sitting on top of the Manusmriti and it's sitting on top of all these, the strange unequal structures and realities we have. So you can't just, 1947, 48, you put this thing on top. Underneath that, things are not changed, right? So if you look at the Universal Declaration, which starts off by saying that all humans are born equal of dignity and rights, that's simply not true. You are not born equal. You're born a woman, you're born a Dalit, you're born a Muslim, you're not born equal. But that's the aspiration. That's the constitution. That's where we want to go to. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No. But if we start by saying, oh, this is an illusion, let's just keep killing each other. That's not an answer.
Thank you. The final question is to you both. Do you think there is a pressing need to revise the SDGs considering the global impact of the pandemic?
I'll take this because this is the most relevant question that has come so far. And I think I forgot to mention it in my, I think I wrote to you about it also, that SDGs definitely need to revise because SDG goals were formed at a certain period of time in a certain context of history, in a certain urgency. And today, before the pandemic, after the pandemic, also the history that we are seeing of the goals being met, not met, the kind of implementation, non-implementation, the kind of human rights goals that have come, not just economic, social and cultural, but also the political goals that have come, that have changed, where the nations have changed their political agendas. So it is very, very important to revise these SDG goals in the context of the changes that are taking place, in the evolution that is taking place. Otherwise, we'll be stuck in a groove.
So, I must say, having been, in these meetings where these goals are being formulated, I think, it's a miracle that we had the first set of goals in the, and because just like we talked about how deeply the country inside India is polarized, the world is also very, very polarized now. So I'm sure those of you who follow UN processes, these are negotiated documents, negotiated, outcomes. So it takes a very long time to agree on a set of goals. So, and, finally we have these goals. I would say that revising the goals, I'm not so sure. You're not going to get another perfect set of goals. So there's an issue about how much the implementation needs to be, So we have a 2030 deadline. So, maybe realistically we've lost a year, you could say, because today the Secretary General of the UN has announced that, because of the International Poverty Eradication Day, that 115 million more people are now sinking below the poverty line in the last, consequent to the pandemic. I mean, that's using World Bank and other data, and I suspect it's much, much higher than that, because the people who are affected by the pandemic are mostly poor people. I mean, the rich have their savings, they have their ways of backing up. It's the poor, the daily wage earners who, and in the Indian context, we were already in such a bad economic shape. The COVID thing came on top of that, and so yeah, I think there's a question of whether the timeline needs to be re-looked at. I wouldn't go back into dismantling the goals and coming up with new ones. I think so. The fact that we have been able to bolt together development, human rights, and environment into one set of goals is a good thing. It's ended up being too cumbersome, 17 goals, 165 targets, etc. But I think that each country has to do what it can do on its own.
That's what somebody has mentioned about. Somebody's written about this 4 key strategies to look at when you talk of the SDG goals, and one of them is to make the goals realistic and small, and the other is about this have few goals incorporated into each other, because anyway they are integrated, and that is why I suppose I was just reading about it. SDG 2030 has 2 basic what do you call it, genders of equality and justice as the goals. So I think that is very comprehensive. You're not talking of separate goals. Equality is all kind encompassing, and justice also. So I think
absolutely. By the way, I also think that our own human rights are being violated by having this Zoom conversation, because it's much easier to see you guys and speak face to face. But here we are. But I know that some of you are in exotic places like Thailand, etc. So we couldn't be sitting here, but hopefully the next opportunity will be having more face-to-face.
And hopefully this is not filtered through technology.
Censored.
Thank you, Salil and Geeta, for taking up the questions. Dear participants, kindly note the feedback form link is sent on the chat box. Request you to kindly give your valuable feedback. Participation certificates will be sent to you via email by Tuesday, 20th October 2020. Finally, we have come to the end of this webinar. Gratitude is the fairest blossom which springs from the soul. On behalf of the organizing committee and the institution, I sincerely thank the speakers, Salil Shetty and Geeta Menon, for sharing your knowledge and experience in the realm of sustainable development goals and human rights. We would like to specifically appreciate the support extended by the UNGCNI, our collaborators, towards the initiative. We also thank our associate collaborators, Mahasa University, the Such India Foundation, and Women in Tech Maldives. It's time to express our heartfelt gratitude to our dear principal, Reverend Dr. Daniel Fernandez SJ, for keeping his faith on us and giving us this opportunity to organize the international webinar series. Thank you, Father, for rendering your constant support throughout. We would now like to specially thank our registrar, Dr. Nirmala Joseph, for relentlessly guiding us and for all the timely interventions without which the webinar would not have become a reality. We also express our earnest gratitude to the Vice Principals, Ms. Neha Rai and Dr. Raja Jabba Singh, for all the constructive feedbacks which have been instrumental at various stages of the preparation. A big thank you to the head of the departments for accommodating all our requests. On behalf of the institution, I would like to thank and congratulate the webinar convener, Dr. Purnima Vijaykumar, for her meticulous coordination. As we come to the end of the event, I would like to acknowledge and appreciate the organizing committee members for coordinating their best and working towards the completion of the second episode. We indeed have a long way to go. Thank you very much for all the patience and support.